Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. How's everyone doing today? Hope everyone is doing good. Give me 1 second, gang. I gotta do a thing. Okay. Well, we're here. We're waiting on the man of the hour, Ryan Mullally, who will be joining us. And tonight, we're going to be talking about birthright citizenship, and we're going to be going over his word war debate that he had with Pisco. So it should be fun. Headless Chicken says, "Oh, is Erudite streaming? I saw her streaming, but I mean, like, I scheduled this already, so I'm gonna stream when I'm gonna stream. But no, I understand if you wanna watch her instead. I get it. I understand, but you should watch me because I'm cool. Oh, she's discussing the same thing too. Oh no. Wow. Wow. Okay. Um. Here we are. Whatever. It's all good. AKA Patozai, nice to see you. Welcome to the show. Remember, just a little friendly reminder that tomorrow my show's going to be earlier than usual, much earlier than usual. I'm going to be going live at 2 Eastern to talk with Sitch and Adam, and that should be fun. Yes, we are almost certainly within the next 24 hours going to do some sort of military action in Iran. I don't know if you guys have been following the news, but it has been reported by Reuters, and, well, there's been strike groups, and we've had other things enter the area. That within the next 24 hours, it's being reported that we're going to have some sort of military action in Iran. And depending on what that looks like, I might even say that's a good idea. If you don't know, Iran, the protesters against the Ayatollahs, right? The rulers, the current rulers, the theocracy in Iran. There's huge, massive protests going on, and and there's huge violence as well. The government is cracking down, killing tons of protesters. Um, in these situations, I do think it's appropriate for America to intervene, to go in there and to stick up for truth and righteousness and all that shit, right? Um, I'm not entirely against it. We'll see though, right? It's being reported. And again, it depends how it's done. Like if you do it poorly, of course I'm against doing things poorly. But if done right, I'm more than happy to support our country going in and kicking ass in Iran. No, I don't. I don't support an occupation. Concluding proscript. Concluding proscript says Trump can become the acting Ayatollah. No, I would not support that. Credible estimates are 12 to 20,000 protesters have been killed in Iran. Yeah, it's brutal. It's really, really bad. Like, if you want to know what like violence looks like in these things, like violent protest of regime or violent crackdowns, that's a good example of it going off the rails. But we'll see, right? We'll see. I really do hope that Iran becomes free, and I am happy to put some of my tax dollars to helping that come to pass. So, yeah. Once Ryan gets here, though, we're going to talk about his recent appearance at World War Debate, where he debated Pisco on the subject of birthright citizenship. So, for those of you who don't know, birthright citizenship is what is guaranteed in the 14th Amendment, though there has been recently a legal challenge put before the Supreme Court of the United States, trying to overturn or undo or provide exceptions to the birthright citizenship. We'll see how that plays out on the legal stage. But Ryan Mullally is a proponent of getting rid of birthright citizenship, and he debated Pisco on the subject at the debate. Now, the debate, the way they chose the winners was by vote, and he won, but we're going to let the man himself say that. We're going to bring him on, and we're going to talk to him, okay? So you guys be nice, okay? Hello, you're live.
We are live. Hey,
Yes, we
Vic,
are.
what's going on, buddy?
We are. How's it going, man? I'm doing well. Uh, it's been some crazy content this past week or so, right? With all the ICE stuff and
Oh,
the
I bet,
Iran
yeah.
stuff. I don't know if you've seen, but we have a strike group that's probably going to be doing something in Iran very
I
soon.
mean, it seems like I as you can imagine, between the debate, shout out World War debate, and then having to come back to real life and get back to my job and all that, I've been a little slow with the news. But yeah, it's been a crazy news cycle. And then just give you my whiplash. I just had a 2 hour conversation. Remember the philosopher who chided Vosh for not knowing that water is H2O?
Vaguely, very
Yeah,
vaguely.
he and I were just doing philosophy for 2 hours because I booked my day to day heavy. So I'm going from like real academic highbrow stuff to the politics, the scrum, the flock of the Wick show. So here we are, buddy. It's good to see you.
We'll see if it's highbrow or lowbrow. We'll find out. So I guess the first question I have for you is like, what what were your expectations going in to the debate? Like, what did you expect it to be, and did it meet your expectations? I guess.
So if
Oh,
you guys haven't,
just before you answer, just a housekeeping thing, gang. What we plan to do is I'm going to talk to him about the aesthetics of it first, the housekeeping of it first, and then I want to really drill down to the topic. So if you're like, why aren't you asking him right away about birthright citizenship? Take a minute. Okay, sorry about that. Go ahead.
all good, all good. Yeah, I mean, if you haven't seen it, the debate's up. My debate with Peace goes on my channel. Shout out Word War Debate. You can watch the whole thing on their channel. I think Pisco has it up on his channel as well. And I will say on Pisco and my channels, the audio is fixed. Whereas if you watch on their channel, there's some audio dips at the beginning. But look, this was a really cool idea. They have an unbelievable space down there. I mean, you've never seen anything like it. It's like a 600,000 square foot space that they have access to with a giant stage, multiple floors. It's out over the water in Atlantic City by the casinos. It's a really cool venue. And the idea of having kind of like these like big high profile debates and then bring people in, letting people duke it out, and then mingling with the fans afterwards, like the people who are in the audience and getting to chat with them about how they thought it went and answering their questions. This is a really, really cool idea.
How
I
was
think
the
it's
how was the crowd? Was it pretty packed? Again, I'm gonna admit something to you. I didn't watch the debate because I tuned into the official channel and the audio was really bad. And I was like, I'll just talk to him about it later.
Well, I'm going to be honest with you. I think that, and I don't think I'm talking out of school when I say this, that this is their pilot,
Sure.
right? Like
Sure.
this was the first event, and let's be real. If this is all to my benefit, and I think to Pisco's benefit, because if this was a fully fleshed out season 10 juggernaut, they're not bringing my 500 subs
Fair
onto
enough.
the show,
Fair enough.
right? So the chaos was my opportunity. And I do think that they obviously were fixing some bugs in real time. Didn't help there was a real rainy day, which is never great. But like ultimately, what I think they did show is that there's an interest in this sort of thing. And now what I think is going to be really cool to watch going forward is that they were trying to promote it, but they didn't have any clips. And how do you promote a debate show without clips? Now they've got some stuff. They've got me smacking Pisco around. They've got Pearl freezing up on stage and Anna teeing off on her for an hour. They've got some stuff they can work with now. So I think I see big things in the future for Word War Debate.
We'll
And I
see.
was really happy to be invited to the first one. Shout out Rob Knorr, without whom I would have gotten the invite.
Well, good. I am glad you enjoyed the experience. I will say that uh it was weird that I didn't know about it before you announced that you were going on. Like, I had no idea there was anything coming up, right? I had no idea. And I would think that, like, me and my audience would be the target audience for that kind of thing. So it was kind of odd that none of us heard about it before again, you announced it. And I was like, oh, Ryan's going on to this? What is this? And I looked and I saw it and I was like, oh, that's a whole thing. So I don't know if the advertising just wasn't there or what happened, but it was odd
Yeah,
to me.
I don't think I'm talking out of turn when I say this. Like originally when they launched it, they were launching it with Andrew Wilson, and
Okay.
they put some promos out with Andrew Wilson, and then they parted ways amicably. Like there's no bad blood there or anything, but they
Sure.
parted ways, and I do think that that created a an advertising vacuum to a
Okay.
certain extent because obviously working like if you look at like modern day debate or debate com, like the Crucible crowd shows up, right? So I think that like that's one avenue that they were advertising through that was then closed because of the they split that. But again, I don't think there's any long term issues there. I just think kind of scheduling didn't work out. So in the future, I think these are the sort of things that are going to get fine tuned. Because you're right. Like I know Pisco was promoting it, I was promoting
Yeah.
it, Rob was promoting it. But if you didn't hear about it in advance, that's something that they should do. Like they should be promoting on your channel because this is the sort of audience
Or
that
at
really
least
likes that sort of
or
thing.
at least I would expect if like I don't know about my channel, right? But it the people I follow, the things I tune into, something should have clued me in before you guys. But that's neither here nor there. I mean, obviously, you're not in charge of the advertising. I'm just curious, right? I'm just talking. We're just yapping, right? I guess my question to you is do you like, first of all, you won, correct? You won the debate?
Yeah, the
How was that decided? I'm just curious. What
it
was the
was
process?
this one was the viewers could vote, which I will say I was a little bit nervous about because to be totally honest with you, I have 500 subs. Pisco has 26,000 subs.
Sure.
So all on some level, all that Pisco would need to do to win the debate is just like have enough of his fans vote, right? Because like if we both turn out our bases, I get crushed.
Is it
So
was it like was it everyone across all audiences across all platforms, or did you have to go to a certain platform to vote?
I didn't get to vote because I was in the middle of
Okay,
it.
so you might not
I
know
think it
this. I
was
don't know.
off of their website, but candidly, I don't think any of us were streaming it live on our own sites at the time. I think
Ah,
we all
okay,
restreamed it, but I think that like at the time there was one central place to watch,
okay.
and then
That would
you
probably even out then. I think. Right.
yeah, I
Yeah.
think it probably helped. But like, look,
Yeah.
I haven't watched Pisco's Cope stream yet. I know he has one up. I haven't seen it.
I haven't seen it at all.
Yeah,
So.
I know that when I debated him on Gibbs' show, he was very upset with the judging because that famous right wing monster enemy Charlie switched from the liberal side and voted for me because she found my arguments more compelling, and I'm sure he found the voters at Word War Debate to be biased and uninformed,
Mhm.
which is odd because. They voted for the nice Jewish boy who said Israel wasn't terrible, and then they voted for Anna when she said women weren't terrible.
Okay, on
So
the Anna and Pearl thing though, there's no way. Like,
there's,
did you see
I,
that? I did see clips of that one, and I'm like,
I,
okay,
I'm just saying, if you're going to line it up on left-right bias,
sure,
Pisco was the only lefty who lost.
fair enough.
So there, I mean, but you know what? That's fine. That's all fun.
What was
We can all
yeah.
promote.
Yeah, what was your like I had Pisco on yesterday for a Pisco versus the world, but we didn't really talk about that, right? But I was curious like what was your biggest, I guess, strongest point in the debate? Like in the opening, are we talking during the back and forth? Do you think you had the strongest closer? Where do you think that you were strongest in your actual debate?
Honestly, oh, sorry. I made a argument from originalist history that the 14th Amendment does not mean what we assume it means today, and therefore could be scaled back in some way. And the debate prompt was the 14th Amendment should be limited. So, not that I don't think the fans were like tracking, Queensberry debate rules, but technically, if it gets limited in any way based off the status quo, then I'm the winner of the debate. That was my position, that we should limit it in some way. Um, and I think that there is a surprising depth of originalist evidence on this topic. I want to shout out Amy Swearer, who's a lawyer at the Heritage Foundation, who wrote a series of really incredible law review articles where she details this. And she was actually cited very heavily in Ted Cruz's amicus brief to the Supreme Court. So that was my primary argument, was that I was going to argue the history and that the 14th Amendment should not be interpreted the way that people have been interpreting it. And I think Pisco, I kind of don't want to like, I don't know if I can speak for him on his strategy. He seemed
You can
like he
talk shit on
want
my show. It's okay. I'll let you.
It seemed like Pisco wanted to argue logical contradictions and hypotheticals and theory. And my argument was, no, this is what the history says. And it's very hard to argue theory when your argument is, oh, well, theoretically, wouldn't this be a problem? And I would say it's not a problem because it actually already happened. And here's when it happened. And here's the author who said it happened. And here's the citation. So
So,
in that sense, I think Pisco found unsure footing, and
okay.
that made the debate difficult for him.
I do wanna challenge you on a few of these things, right? Because I have read the debate between the senators during when they were writing the 14th Amendment, and I think I've come to different conclusions than you have, but we will get to that.
Mhm.
And I hope you'll indulge me in just kind of testing your conclusion here. But before we do that, I do want to
Sure,
get through the rest of
this
the.
might be a harder debate than the one I
Mm,
had on stage.
I
If
don't know.
you're,
I just like.
I had there was no evidence Pisco had read the debates during that during the debate we had. So
Oh,
that's
fair enough.
honestly why I think I won the debate, is that like I was better prepared
You
to
brought
discuss the
sources,
history.
and he brought vibes. Is
Basically,
your
yeah.
argument?
But
Maybe.
what he wanted to do, and by the way, there's no bad blood.
Sure.
Dropping kayfabe, like
Yeah.
Pisco and I get along. We hang out, like it's fine. But like what Pisco wanted to do was the thing that he does, where he asks you a lengthy question with like five loaded presuppositions, tries to force a one-word answer, and then spends 10 minutes saying why you're wrong. And that wasn't that's something I'll entertain in a conversation between me and him when I'm testing my ideas. But when we're in debate mode on a stage, I'm not going to let that happen. I'm going to present my case
How feisty
forcefully.
were you guys? Like, was it a lot of interruptions, talking over? Like, how the moderation? Let me ask about the moderation. Did he basically let you guys go at it, or was he pretty hands on? Do you have
He was
any comments on the mod
he
of
was
the debate?
hands off and fair. I would say the one thing Pisco probably complains about is that if Pisco asked me a question and I kept answering and didn't limit myself to like one or two words, like yes, no, and then Pisco tried to cut me off. And I said, Pisco, if you ask me a question, you got to let me answer it. He would step in and say, yeah, you got to let him answer the question. And that happened a few times. Um, but I don't think that's unfair. I think that's an artifact of the way that Pisco debates. He likes to try to get you into the monosyllabic answer to a question. And that's just bad debate strategy. Like you should never let yourself, unless you're really sure about the yes or no answer, just like letting the other person talk for 20 minutes and you get to say yes or no is hardly a way to convince the audience that you're right. So there has to be some level where you're allowed to
Well,
answer the
it
question.
really depends. It depends on the format. It depends, like, if I look, I found in these spaces, and this is more of a meta thing. This isn't applying to your guys' debate necessarily, but just having hosted and been a part of and watched many different debates. The person who can speak the most confidently and who has the most mic time tends to do better. So the strategy of hogging the mic and then forcing only a single response from the opponent and then going back to explain why that response was wrong can be effective, but if it's done too much, people find you annoying. And if people find you annoying, they don't care what your debate strategy is, or they don't care about your point really. They find you annoying, so they're going to downvote you in their minds. So
Yeah, and again, I'll throw some shade, but me and Pisco do get along, so I just want to remind people, don't get too caught up in the hype. I'm a former teacher and a trial lawyer, so I think comparatively, I have a advantage in translating my ideas into easy to understand non-legalese phrasing that isn't something that people are going to like pull their eyes out when they hear, because sometimes as Pisco gets frustrated, he starts relying more and more on legalese and kind of rattling off complicated concepts that the audience can't follow really fast. And I don't think that people find that persuasive, truthfully. I think that you need to
Depends.
give them a through line and a story that they can understand and explain it to them. I don't think anyone likes it when lawyers start spouting off buzzwords.
It can get people who like to support like experts, quote unquote. If they feel like you are an expert in the subject, they tend to give you more leeway. And so I understand the strategy there, but you're probably correct that just in general, I mean, you're probably correct that people want a narrative. And if you give them a narrative, they're more likely to follow along with that narrative and
Yeah, I
support
think
your
that's
narrative.
right. And I think here, at the risk of talking about the substance, or we can do more about the show if you
No,
prefer,
we can go in the substance.
wherever you want to
I'm
go.
really curious. Yeah.
Um, the I will say I started when I started researching this, I was 80-20 Trump loses. I was
Mm.
sure he was going to lose because I know that it's been the settled practice of the United States for
So
almost
just
100
just to
years.
be clear, you weren't kayfabing your position. You weren't steelmanning. Your actual position is that the birthright citizenship should be amended or done away with.
No, that's not. Neither of those is my position.
Okay, what is your position? Let's
No
start with there.
one,
I'm really
no
curious.
one is advancing the position that birthright citizenship should be done away with. What the conversation is about the words that the 14th Amendment. What does it mean? What does the 14th Amendment mean? So, like, no, it's not on the table that like if you're a citizen, your kid's not a citizen. For example, if they're born here, like that's everyone agrees that's right.
Well, okay, when we
The-
say birthright citizenship, I guess I should define what I mean. I mean the practice as established in Kim Wong Ark. I think I'm saying it
Wong
wrong.
Kim Ark.
Wong Kim Ark, thank you. Where anyone, even from illegal immigrant, whether they're lawful
Mhm.
or unlawful resident, it just counts. If you're here and you're born here, that's it. Legal
So
status doesn't matter.
yeah, and just to make sure we have the terms clear, that's what I refer to as universal birthright citizenship, which is not truly universal. There are actually a few
Yeah,
exceptions,
and
but
they put that in there. I understand, but
yeah,
so
but like I think calling it like universal or
okay,
near
we can use
universal
universal birthright citizenship. So just to
is
be clear, you're against universal birthright citizenship.
the argument that I made is that it is not constitutionally required. Now, of course, the country can still do it. We can do things that aren't constitutionally required. It's just that's not what the 14th Amendment requires, at least not in all instances. And the starting point for this, for me, and I said, like I told you, like when I started looking into this, I did not have the position I have today. I had your position when I started doing the
Sure.
research. And part of the reason was I knew about Wong Kim Ark, and I did not think the Supreme Court would be willing to overturn it.
It's
So,
over 100 years old, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
But when I read the scholarship and the other side of the argument, they pointed out something that was very, very interesting to me. Wong Kim Ark, to quote the court, said it was resolving a single question. And the single question it was resolving is whether or not for a child with Chinese parents of Chinese lineage, whose children are subjects of the Emperor of China, so they're Chinese citizens, who is here, his parents were here legally and permanently. Does birthright citizenship apply? And the answer there is yes. But what's interesting about that is President Trump's executive order doesn't say anything different than that. It says that it's going forward, there won't be birthright citizenship if you're here temporarily or illegally. Sorry, if the mother's here temporarily or illegally and the father doesn't have citizenship or status, which is well in line with Wong Kim Ark. Now, I don't, what I suspect the court will do is it won't overturn Wong Kim Ark. It will limit Wong Kim Ark to its holding. It'll say the holding's good, but the reasoning was bad. And because the reasoning was bad, we're not going to read it as broadly as people used to read it. And therefore, we can limit birthright citizenship either as to the people who are here illegally or the people who are only here temporarily. I think the argument for limiting it as to the people who are here temporarily is substantially stronger than the ones who are here illegally. But either, of course, would mean I win the debate because any limitation was a win for me. So that distinction didn't really matter for the debate
So
we had on stage.
I understand that your position is Wong Kim Ark was only dealing with that single question, but we got Plyler versus Doe in 1982 where they reference the citizenship clause, right? And they say this, and I'm going to quote. This is from Brennan, who wrote the opinion. He says, "No plausible." He brings this up. I'll just quote the whole thing. Every citizen or subject of another country, while domiciled here, is within the allegiance and the protection, and consequently subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. No plausible distinction with respect to 14th Amendment jurisdiction can be drawn between resident aliens whose entry into the United States was lawful and resident aliens whose entry was unlawful. What would be your counter?
Yeah. So if the court's overturning and the reasoning, not the outcome, but the logic of Wong Kim Ark, it would have no problem disregarding what that's called dicta on dicta, right? Like in a for those of you who don't read Supreme Court cases all the time, there's the holding, which is like the hard and fast law. What is the legal rule? Then there's the reasoning, which is the dicta. And the dicta is persuasive, and for the Supreme Court, very persuasive, but is not itself binding in the same way. In that case, they were talking about not the citizenship. The case was not about the citizenship clause. It was about equal protection, and that statement was dicta discussing the dicta in Wong Kim Ark.
Okay.
So, in a world where the Supreme Court is comfortable saying we're limiting Wong Kim Ark to its holding, which is the world where that Trump wins this case, then they're certainly going to be comfortable disregarding dicta on dicta. I will say the trick here on some level turns on the history, and it turns on how convincing you find the court's logic in Wong Kim Ark that we were adopting the English common law on this topic, which I find obviously the court in Wong Kim Ark expressly said that's what they were doing. And if you think that's correct, then Trump's going to lose in the Supreme Court. But I suspect that the conservative originalist jurists are going to say that that was not correct, or at least was not fully correct. And while they won't overturn Wong Kim Ark, they'll limit it because the reasoning just doesn't hold up.
Interesting. Since we're in the subject like of the debate now, right? So we talk about originalism, and as I understand it, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, originalist intent means that you look at what the founders or writers of the law meant it to be when you were making a decision on what that law is. Is that an accurate summary? Did I get it wrong? Do you want to mess with that at all?
It is close. People get this are close, but technically wrong most of the time. Originalism means that to the extent it's ascertainable, the original public meaning controls. And the original public meaning is not the same thing as what was intended by the authors. And it's how were the words understood at the time, right? So what the authors said of a constitutional amendment is originalist evidence, but not dispositive evidence. Because when you get this is messy, but when you get into legislative history, you'll find that the authors of a various provision say all kinds of contradictory things. Like if you think about like a law that gets passed in Congress today, like what AOC said about it, and like what Massey said about it might be very different. So just the fact that a lawmaker said something, it's evidence, but then you have to weigh it against their role, how knowledgeable they were,
Okay.
what people did historically. So, like a great example of this, that I give is some people say that the Eighth Amendment should make the death penalty unconstitutional because the death penalty is cruel and unusual punishment, right?
Okay.
Okay, that's a fine argument to make, but I can tell you that's wrong from an originalist perspective without looking at any quotes from anybody who wrote the Eighth Amendment. And how do I know this? Because before they passed the Eighth Amendment, the death penalty was fine. And after they passed the Eighth Amendment, the death penalty continued to be the punishment for almost every crime. So it's impossible that at the time that the Eighth Amendment was ratified, it was publicly understood as making the death penalty unconstitutional. So if you're going to look at the original meaning, you can make the argument from the history as well as from the statements. So it's not limited to the statements, if that helps.
Would you, it does help. It just shows it's a little more murky and a little harder to really just say, well, this guy said at this point X, so it must be X, because there might be contradictory statements, there might be different evidence of how it was actually used, etc. I guess, what would you say is the strongest evidence that you have that the authors of the 14th Amendment did not intend it to apply to illegal immigrants or the children of illegal immigrants? It wouldn't apply.
Illegal's the harder one. Temporary is the easier one.
Okay, let's say
to be
temporary.
candid.
Go ahead.
So if you want to start with originalist evidence, with I think the simplest piece of originalist evidence. So hold on, let me pull up my notes, because if we're doing substance.
Sure. While you're doing that, €6 from DT. Thank you for the €6. This says, notice how none of Mullally's debate strategy, quote unquote, goes to finding the actual truth. Rhetoric is more important for Trumpies, always. Well, thank you for the €6.
Yeah. You obviously I appreciate that you're donating to WIC, but holy shit, that's a dumb point. The way that you approach a conversation where you're trying to test your ideas is different than the way you approach a public judged debate where you're advocating for one side. Could you imagine how fucking stupid and how angry you would be if you hired me to be your lawyer because you were charged with murder because your dumbass probably does something like that, and I went to court and said, you know what we're here to do? We're here to find the truth. And you know what? I think he might have done it. Like, who gives a shit? Like, I mean, I'm not here to advocate for him. I'm here to advocate for, the truth generally.
Oh, hold on. Thank you for the raid, Chris Speaks. Sorry. Yeah. Thank you for the raid.
In an adversarial system, it is trivially true that the adversaries have to adopt the positions they're arguing for, and that they will take a position that is affirmative and not express doubts about their own position if it would disadvantage them. Like, conversations are different. They have different purposes. On a debate stage with a judge,
bro,
I'm going to talk differently.
You're giving a $50 answer to a $6 super chat.
It's a fucking idiotic. It's an idiotic super chat. So that's why I gave the answer. But anyway.
200 bits. Sorry, I got to make a little more money. 200 bits from Headless Chicken. There's something uniquely small about adults who feel threatened by people who don't look like them. Nothing exposes fear faster than trying to disqualify people at birth, especially if they're not white. This isn't about the Constitution. It's about who you're afraid will replace you. When your politics require narrowing who counts as American, you're not defending a nation. It's your fat ego. The replacement can't happen quickly enough. Well, thank you for the 200 bits, but you guys are...
Wow, that sounds like a winning political strategy. I encourage you to run on that, see how it goes. So in terms of the argument boils down to this. On one hand, if the phrase in the 14th Amendment that matters is if you're born subject to the jurisdiction thereof. And yes, all the play in the joints in this conversation is in the phrase subject to the jurisdiction thereof. If you're a universal birthright citizenship advocate, you're taking the position that it means at all subject to the jurisdiction. Like, if you could be arrested, if you could be thrown in jail, if you could be sued, you're subject to the jurisdiction. If you're taking my position, you're saying that subject to the jurisdiction thereof means subject to the complete jurisdiction thereof, right? Not partial jurisdiction, full jurisdiction. And full jurisdiction has a different meaning than just like you could be arrested or you could be sued. And there is very strong originalist evidence for this. Like, for example, keep in mind, my point is the phrase should be interpreted as subject to the complete jurisdiction thereof. Sure. I'm fond of this quote from Senator Lyman Trumbull. Subject to the jurisdiction thereof means subject to the complete jurisdiction thereof. So it's...
Yeah, he's talking about... because again, I read the debate, man. He's talking about Native Americans, Indians at the time were under a series of treaties, and some of them were not under the complete legal jurisdiction.
They were not.
For example, if you were an Indian, again in the 1860s in America, and you committed a crime outside the reservation. Say you were visiting in New York or Ohio or somewhere, and you weren't part of, you were, again, a citizen of the reservation, but you weren't on reservation land, and you committed a crime under on our soil, you would not necessarily be under our legal jurisdiction. You may not be. We may not have been able to prosecute you. There are certain crimes where we absolutely could, and there are certain crimes where we could not. Like, so, for example, if you stole from another Indian, wouldn't be our jurisdiction. So he's very specific. And as he goes, he's questioned about this in the debate, and he says something, and I'll bring this up real quick. Let me get to it. He says something. He's questioned about the Wild Plains Indians. Okay, that's their language, not mine. Okay, gang. The Wild Plain Indians, which would sometimes
people don't clutch your pearls. You can't
sure.
have
I'm just saying
without using the word Indian. That's the word that was used in the documents. It's the words they all use. If you're going to clutch your pearls about that, you'll just never get anywhere.
Well, they also talk about gypsies, and we're going to get to that, gypsies and all these other things, right? We'll get there. But I'm just saying, like, he's questioned by, what's this guy's name? Mr. Wade? No, Mr. Johnson. Sorry, Senator Johnson at the time. And he goes on this questioning of his statement there. And he basically says, well, sometimes the Indians are subject to our legal jurisdiction. He brings up murder as the example. And he asks this, he's like, if you think that we don't try these people for murder, you're very much mistaken. They are under our legal jurisdiction. And Mr. Trumbull says, well, no, not except where it's done under special provision, not with the wild Indians of the plains. And Mr. Johnson says, well, by specific provision of legislation that I understand, I'm referring to that. And Mr. Trumbull says, we propose to make citizens of those brought under our jurisdiction in that way. Yes, nobody objects to that, I reckon. So he clarifies later in this statement that he did not mean, like, when he said complete jurisdiction, he's talking still about complete legal jurisdiction, and he qualifies that.
Complete, meaning that you
legal
have
jurisdiction.
Complete, but there are things that you cannot do, as you yourself were saying, if somebody has incomplete allegiance to the United States. Like, for example, you can't be drafted. You can't be charged with treason, right? So one thing that was on the mind of the people when they wrote these provisions is in 1863, there was a draft and for the Civil War. And when they were drafting people for the Civil War, there's an odd situation where there were a lot of foreigners who were living in America permanently. They're living here
and stuff like that.
Yeah. But all of a sudden, we have to figure out, can we draft them? And they say, no, I'm not American. I'm English. I'm French. I'm German. I don't want to be drafted, right? I don't want to fight. And what the Congress had to decide is who is sufficiently ours? Who is somebody that we can draft? Who do we have that level of, I dare say it, complete jurisdiction over? And what Congress did in 1863
Yeah, but just hold on. Can I address that?
Well, let me finish the point. In the middle of it. And, yeah, they decided that only foreigners who had signed what's called a Declaration of Intent could be drafted. And the Declaration of Intent said that they forswore their foreign allegiances and they wanted to be American and they subjected themselves to the complete jurisdiction of the United States. So by that decision, which was made by the same Congress people a few years earlier, is very much on their mind. And I think that the example you give about the Native Americans perfectly explains, why complete jurisdiction is the correct way of looking at it. Native Americans were not subject to the complete jurisdiction. They just weren't. I don't think they could be drafted. There might have been some historical idiosyncrasies there, but as a regular matter,
because there's a whole system of treaties that in the 1870s got redone, right? So
but in any case, they were quasi-sovereign. As you said, there's a lot of things you couldn't do with Native Americans because they were not fully American, because they lacked political allegiance. And
no, that wasn't
on the universal birthright citizenship theory, that's a idiosyncratic exception, whereas on my theory, it's a logical consequence of the rule. So ultimately, the Indian example better fits my theory than yours, to be candid.
I disagree, and I'll tell you why. Like, for example, your position on drafting. The 14th Amendment applies to the children of these people. We don't draft children. Children can't be drafted. You can't draft a 2-year-old, right? I guess you could, but we've never done that.
Pisco tried this argument.
Where does our jurisdiction apply to? We're talking about the children specifically.
and it is
So the
trivially
draft point, can you
true.
just acknowledge the draft point doesn't make sense in that
No,
context?
it makes absolute sense.
Explain
The,
then.
the question is, what does complete jurisdiction mean? Complete jurisdiction means somebody that we have political allegiance over. It's trivially true that the political allegiance of a child follows that of its parent. It
Well,
could be
except
it
for
could
in
it could
the
be no
18, hold on. Except for we actually have law about this, the English versus Trustees of Snug Harbor. This is their reasoning. I'm going to quote it to you. Okay, it
sorry,
says the rule commonly laid
which
down
case
in
is
the
this?
books is
Sorry,
that
which
every
case is
person.
this?
Can I
Which
finish?
case is this? I just don't know the
Oh,
case you're
the
talking about.
I don't know how to English versus Trustees of Sailors Snug Harbor. Okay, this was Justice Joseph Story. Was the, I guess, what's the word where he made the opinion, right? He drafted the opinion or whatever. He says this. He says the rule commonly laid down in the books is that every person who's born with an allegiance of a sovereign is a subject, and e converso, that every person born without such allegiance is an alien. Two things usually concur to create citizenship. First, birth locally within the dominions of the sovereign, and secondly, birth within the protection and obedience, or in other words, within the legitimates of the sovereign. That is, and this is the part that matters, the party must be born within a place where the sovereign is at the time in full possession and exercise of his power, and the party must also, at his birth, derive protection from, and consequently owe obedience and allegiance to that sovereign as such de facto. So in other words, because they are protected by our laws, you can't go up and murder that baby. They owe allegiance to us at the time of their birth because we are protecting them.
So
That's
what
the
you're just
argument. And this was
what
then
what
in
what what Justice Story is describing there
sure.
is the English common law of jus soli,
Which
which
we
is
we agree is what they were again
no,
deciding on at the time.
that's the no, that's the aspect of Wong Kim Ark I think the Supreme Court is going to say is wrong. So I mean, it's true. It's of course true that Wong Kim Ark said that the common law of England informed the 14th Amendment. I think they were wrong to say that. I think when the Supreme Court limits Wong Kim Ark to its holding, what they're going to do is say that the holding of Wong Kim Ark was correct, but the idea that the founders imported the English common law is incorrect. And in fact, what we actually have is Americanized common law on this subject. And the reason, amongst others, that I think they're going to do this is that the English common law of jus soli is fundamentally incompatible with the American Revolution. If you look at what the English common law is, it's not a doctrine of citizenship, it's a doctrine of subjecthood. It grew out of feudal England. It was the idea that if you were born somewhere, you owed your allegiance to that king, to that lord forever. There was no right of expatriation. There was no way to stop owing your service and allegiance to the king. It was permanent and forever. And if it were the law, the American Revolution is, of course, illegal.
Except
And
if we make one single change to that and allow for expatriation, right? It does not negate the fact that we have allegiance at birth due to the reasoning of you owe protection or you owe allegiance to the state who is protecting you at the time of your birth. You can later, once you reach the age of accountability, renounce that, perhaps expatriate, which I agree the English common law did not have, but we do. Right, you can renounce your American citizenship. Right, that is a thing that you can do. I just don't think it negates the fact that the reasoning that yes, when someone is born, they are at their most fragile and they owe some allegiance. You can argue how much to the state and the forces that are protecting them at the time.
oh,
Because if someone broke in right now to a hospital and tried to steal an illegal immigrant's baby, our cops would stop that from happening. Correct?
see, I think this argument, I take it. You know, it's like
Sure.
it's an argument that we should maintain the English common law, despite the fact
Well, no,
that
not the
in
English
so,
common law. This portion of it.
okay, that this portion of the
Yes.
English common law, despite the fact that it's in philosophically in, let's call it, tension. I'll be charitable with the our act of revolution. The thing about it is, though, I just don't actually think that's what people thought at the time. I like if you look at
That was a ruling from the time.
well, Joseph Story, that was before the 14th Amendment. And yeah,
Sure.
like Joseph Story was a big fan of that. But then it's very difficult to explain, Wick, why the 18th Amendment, sorry, the 14th Amendment was ratified in 1868. In
Well, hold
1885,
on. You know why it was ratified in 1868? Because it was trying to
yeah,
adjudicate
but
a question.
don't cut me off. Let me make the point.
Oh,
In
okay.
1885, after it was ratified, there are many examples. For example, a woman named Miss Devereux. She was on a ship from Ireland, and she was on trying to enter New York and was trying to become an American. Ultimately, the Department of Justice said she was not going to be given entry. But before that happened, she gave birth. And because the people weren't monsters, they took her to a hospital in New York. She gave birth in the hospital. And this is after the 14th Amendment was ratified. And she said, well, I have this child. The child's an American, surely. And they said, nope, you're Irish, your kid's Irish. And they sent her home. The same thing happened with Germans who were here temporarily. They had kids in the country. They brought the kids back to Germany, and they wrote to two secretaries of state, Mr. Bayard, and the name of the other one's escaping me because it's unpronounceable. And in two different instances, the Secretary of State said, you were here temporarily. You were here temporarily, and as a result, you do not get birthright citizenship for your children.
But
So
unfortunately,
there's
finish your point. Sorry. Yeah.
so the point is, at that time period, this was viewed as a discretionary decision, not a constitutional requirement. So I don't really buy the argument that they imported this notion of English common law, which would have made all the things the government was doing that I just described illegal.
But unfortunately for you, we have further precedent before the 14th Amendment and after the 14th Amendment, which contradicts those things, which, yes, I will grant you that there was some confusion on how this would be applied. And you would grant me, I hope, that the courts don't always make the right decisions. Sometimes they rule wrongly. They interpret
Like
things
yeah.
wrongly. Is that something you just grant me?
Like Mark, yeah.
Yeah, well, my argument would be that in these instances that you're citing, they were ruling incorrectly. And when the Supreme Court took it up in Mark, I think that they tried to put a more kind of like, this is going to be it. And we've had 100 years of precedent where we have ruled in this manner. And I want to speak on the allegiance bit just a little more, because we have quotes from the debate itself, right, where they talk about allegiance. And one of the opponents of the 14th Amendment at the time was a gentleman by the name of, what's his face, Cohen? He's from Pennsylvania, okay? He's a Republican from Pennsylvania at the time, Edgar Cohen, and he was against the 14th Amendment, and he spoke up several times during the debate because he didn't want all those gypsies that were going around in his state, or the Chinese, right, in California. He didn't want their children to have citizenship. And he says this, and I'm going to quote from this. He says, the proposition before us relates simply in that the respect to the children begotten of Chinese parents and is that response? No, this is Kanez's response. Let me get his quote.
While you're looking that up,
Yeah,
I'd just like to point out that if Pisco had your knowledge of the history, this would have been a closer debate. You're doing better than he did.
I read it because when the case itself came up, right, I was like, holy shit, they can't do this, right?
All right, but when Pisco says this is biased, imagine that I'm marshaling the facts that I've marshaled, and you, instead of having the facts that you're marshaling, had no working understanding of the historic record.
Okay, fair enough.
That's how the debate went. So nice. Yeah, you could enjoy that later if you have time.
Sure.
But it was he was not prepared.
Yeah, if he made bad arguments, and I'm not going to defend bad arguments.
Yeah,
unfortunately, this is the thing people don't understand, is that someone can be right and correct and make bad arguments and lose a debate, and people don't understand that concept. I don't know why.
But Wick, while you're looking up,
but
you got.
Yeah, I got it. He says, people who owe my state no allegiance, and he uses that word, who pretend to owe none, who recognize no authority in her government, who have a distinct independent government of their own, who pay no taxes, who never perform military service, who do nothing, in fact, which becomes a citizen, and perform none of the duties which devolve upon him, the children of these will be granted citizenship under this amendment. And he opposed it on those grounds. So he understood at the time that this would give to people who wouldn't have to be drafted, right? To their children specifically, who weren't eligible for the draft, who didn't pay taxes and all these things. He understood that these people owed no allegiance, but their children would still be covered on this. That's why he
Yeah.
voted against it.
And then on the flip side, if you look at what the Supreme Court did in 1872 and 1884, in 1872, they wrote the phrase subject to its jurisdiction was intended to exclude from its operation children of ministers, consuls, and citizens or subjects of foreign states born within the United States. And in 1884, they wrote, the evident meaning of these last words, which are subject to the jurisdiction thereof, is not merely subject in some respect or degree to the jurisdiction of the United States, but completely subject to their political jurisdiction and owing them direct and immediate allegiance.
And I would
So
argue that the kids do. They
you,
owe
you think,
direct and immediate allegiance to the United States because our laws at the time of their birth protect them.
well, the thing about that is that ultimately, and can I back off from the
Of
argument
course,
for a
sure.
second and just make a
I
common
I
sense?
am in a debate mode, so we're going at it, but there's no
Yeah,
right or
I'm
wrong.
happy to
Yeah.
go at it, but I want to make the common sense point that I would not make in like a pure debate setting.
Mm.
Here's the ultimate problem with this debate. The reason the history is so confusing, and the reason why the argument against temporary birthright people, sorry, the reason against parents who are here temporarily getting birthright citizenship is ultimately better than the argument against people who are here illegally getting birthright citizenship. The idea of illegal in the way we use the phrase today didn't exist
That's
when
true.
the 14th Amendment was written. So the writings on that particular subject are inherently confusing because we're looking to see how the words were understood and then how those words would map onto a concept that was later invented, which you can do from an originalist framework that they do in the Second Amendment all the time, but it's not, it does make the history more complicated.
Well, they do
um
it for the First Amendment too, right? They
yeah.
apply because obviously this didn't exist when they wrote the First Amendment, right? No one thought that this would exist, and yet we do apply the First Amendment to technological tech technological advances. But
Yeah,
you're exactly correct. Can I read a
but if
couple of
you
my super chats real quick
oh,
before
sure, go ahead.
we go on? Yeah, $10 from Old School 293. The agent with internal bleed and your refusal to believe it is why I no longer respect you. You have no consistent method to get at the truth. You've believed anonymous sources before many times. I'll address this real quickly. So, for those of you who don't know, CBS News released a report that 2 anonymous U.S. officials had been briefed that the agent who shot Good got internal bleeding, right? That's all we know. I don't believe it because, A, it's hearsay of hearsay. B, these officials have lied about this incident from the beginning. And C, it stands to reason if they had evidence that he was injured, they would have released it immediately. He was in the hospital the same day. He was released the same day he got in, right? So obviously it wasn't serious. And they would have just released that. They would have released the medical reports, the photos, all that. It would have been blasted in our faces. They didn't do that. They waited, what? It's been 5, 6 days now? No, 7 days now. And they still haven't released that? And you are asking me to believe this? Bullshit. Show me the medical reports. Show me some videos. Like internal bleeding. I got internal bleeding when I stubbed my toe and my toe had a slight bruise. That's internal bleeding. Anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to rant too much, but I mean, come on. It doesn't pass the smell test. And DT for €6 says, look for the highest amount of self-declaring victories to see who's a loser. Thank you for that. Okay, sorry about that. Go on.
Yeah, so that's what makes the history complicated, and I think that if we're leaving the debate mode for a second and going like more into like dialectic mode, ultimately, what I was surprised by when I started researching this was how good the history was on my side of the argument, because I had assumed it was overwhelmingly on your side of the argument because I had read Wong Kim Ark. But one of the gateways into this is realizing as you read Wong Kim Ark, why do they keep talking about the fact that his parents were permanently domiciled here? Like, if Wong Kim Ark was really about universal birthright citizenship, that fact is irrelevant. completely irrelevant. But they bring it up 19 times, maybe 17. I haven't counted in a little while, but it gets brought up a lot. In fact, if you read the holding of the case, they specifically say the single question they were deciding, and I'm moving around the quote a little bit, was whether a child born in the United States of parents of Chinese descent, who at the time of his birth are subjects of the Emperor of China, but have a permanent domicile and residence in the United States and are there carrying on business. Why would they focus on these facts that don't matter at all under the universal birthright citizenship theory? Because they did matter. Like there was an understanding that if you were just here temporarily, like Mary Devereaux was when she gave birth, that you didn't get birthright citizenship. And the other thing that was really interesting about this, and then there's some more history to talk about, but
Oh, we'll
is
get to
that,
that. I do have one more super chat, but
yeah,
yeah, finish
the
your point. And then we'll get to
scholars at the time thought the same thing.
it.
Like
Can you repeat
in
that last bit? Can you repeat
the
that last bit?
scholars, the legal
Oh, the
scholars,
scholars. Got you. Okay, I'm like the
after
stellars.
Wong Kim Ark, like after Wong Kim Ark was passed. So like in Yale Law Journal, a few months after Wong Kim Ark was passed, they wrote, but the English rule emphatically denies the right to change one's allegiance, while the United States has always upheld the right of expatriation. Moreover, in this country, the alien must be permanently domiciled, while in Great Britain, birth during a mere temporary sojourn is sufficient to render the child a British subject.
So
So,
to
like, but what I'm saying is, at the time, even at the time when Wong Kim Ark was decided, the idea that someone could be here just temporarily and get birthright citizenship is not what people understood that case to mean. And I could go on. I have a bunch of quotes if you
yeah,
want them.
we'll get to it. But I'll read the super chat before I forget, and then we'll get to my objections to your argumentation here. $5 from Deadly Sin to say, does Ryan acknowledge that his idea will create stateless people? Also, even if they were born to quote unquote illegals in the USA, they still can be drafted.
Um, the stateless people question has been looked at. The empirical evidence suggests it's basically not an issue. In order for you to be stateless, you would have to not be a citizen of the country that you were leaving when you came here temporarily. So it's just the situations in which that occurs are vanishingly slim. What was the second question? I kind of forgot.
I'm scrolling back up to it. It wasn't a question; it was a statement. Also, even if they were born to illegals in the USA, they still can be drafted.
You can be drafted if you're born in at this point, yeah, but the USA has been doing universal birthright citizenship, so it's kind of circular in that sense. Like, yes, if you're a citizen, you can be drafted. I don't think anyone disagrees with that.
Now,
And
is
again, also just keep
oh,
in mind, the argument I'm making is not that we shouldn't have more birthright citizenship than the Constitution requires. I'm only arguing the Constitution doesn't require this much, which means that it's a policy decision and people could make different policy decisions. Just like, look, if your parents are traveling in Europe when you're born, and you're a US citizen, not because the Constitution requires it, but because there's a statute, right? Like not everything's a constitutional issue.
certainly. I guess the two kind of arguments against your argumentation is the permanent resident, right? With when you quote the scholars, for example, when they talk about alien permanent residents, right? Well, you can have an illegal immigrant in here that also has a permanent resident here. I don't
Oh,
think
I
that
agree. I
illegal
agree.
necessarily means temporary in a lot of
No, but
cases.
that's why I was saying the historical argument to exclude the children of temporary visitors is stronger than the argument on illegality. I think that you'll find, in terms of the richness of the
Sure.
history and the quotes, there's a lot more weight on that part. I would be unsurprised. Like if I was going to put my money, if I was going to make my bold prediction,
Do you want to put a bet on this? Because I'm willing to bet that this is decided against Trump. I'll put
ooh,
$100 on it.
I would bet on that, but only if we define against Trump. Because, like, for example,
Okay.
let's say what I think happens will happen. My bold prediction is they limit Wong Kim Ark to their facts. They say Trump. the 14th Amendment does not require birthright citizenship for people whose parents were only here temporarily, but we do not agree with President Trump that if you're here illegally, that's sufficient to bar birthright citizenship. Like, if, for example, if you were here illegally, but you've been here for 20 years, right? I don't think the
Well,
Supreme Court's going to touch
what
that
would
one.
be the cutoff on that? Say so, and I had a discussion.
They
Full
wouldn't
disclosure, I
say
had a
they.
discussion earlier with Zetsway about this exact point. Like he made this exact argument. Um, and
That's what
my
I would bet.
question, like, if I come to this even on a visiting visa, right? Like, I'm a visiting visa, so I don't intend to stay initially, but I come to the country, I fall in love with it, and now I've decided I want to live here, right? How would I in like how would the courts prove that that's not true?
Yeah, what would happen is the same thing that happens whenever the court changes or announces a doctrine. They would give the rule, and then they'd let the lower courts play with it, and there'd be some confusion, and then it would come back up, and they'd announce the rule on better facts, right? They don't like to do it in a vacuum. They like to let it develop a little bit. I think what they would look at is things that are historically analogous to the declarations of intent I was talking about in the 1863 context. So, like, if you were applying for a visa or a program that meant that you were attempting to be here permanently, if you were trying to get green card status, if you like, I think they'd look to things like this where you were giving up your foreign allegiances, or at least in the process of giving up your foreign allegiances. And I think that that would be actually a pretty good outcome because, like, most of the people, when you talk about like anchor babies or like the things that like the right's concerned about, yes, they're illegal, but they're also temporary. So I actually think the temporary category is the more important category, both politically and the stronger argument legally. In terms of the illegal category, the argument is I will admit, a harder needle to thread. But just to put it out there, if you want to chew on it, the other thing that Wong Kim Ark says over and over and over again is that Wong Kim Ark's parents were here doing business. And when I was a law student, I couldn't figure out why they kept saying that because, like, I didn't even know what it meant and why do you repeat it? Amy Swearer pointed out, and she was the first one I saw who connected these dots, that at that time we had the Chinese Exclusion Acts. And
Yes, they were
under the Chinese
illegal.
Exclusion Acts, it was illegal almost categorically for Chinese laborers to be in the country. And laborer was defined very broadly, like skilled, unskilled, it was all labor. But if you were a merchant, if you were here doing business, you could be here legally. So Wong Kim Ark's parents, because they were merchants, had the legal right to be here. They did not have the right to naturalize because of the treaty that we had with China at the time that said no
Yeah,
Chinese
I
citizen could naturalize. But in fact, his parents were not just here permanently, but legally when he was born. But I will candidly admit that the argument is much better for temporary than
fair
illegal.
enough. I guess I just can't get over the fact, and this is what just it's just keeping me from following your line, is that we have a rich history in this country, even antebellum, right? Antebellum before the 14th Amendment of ruling in a certain way, and after and ruling a certain way. And while I grant you there might be exceptions to this, right? Absolutely. I think combine that with the language used by the senators in the 14th Amendment debate, it became clear to me that they were intending it to, as Mr. Howard says it, I think pretty clearly here. He says, sorry, I'm scrolling. Every person born within the limits, right, of the United States and subject to their jurisdiction is by virtue of natural law and national law a citizen of the United States. This will not, of course, include persons born in the United States who are foreigners, aliens, who belong to the families of ambassadors or foreign ministers, accredited to the government of the United States, but will include every other class of person. I think it's really clear that these people, if I may finish, right, it's really clear that, again, it's not just his quotes, but the quotes of the opponents, as I mentioned, that show that this was understood at the time to apply to these groups of people. Now, the Indians, the Native Americans, different group, right? They were under different treaties, and it made things a little murky there, and they had a little back and forth there about that. But when it comes to, like, even people who had no allegiance to the country, it was intended to apply to them, at least from my plain text reading.
Well, I think that, this is the thing about the history. This is where it gets really difficult to do originalism because you have to sort through history that's often cuts both ways and figure out what's more compelling to you. So if you look at the Civil Rights Act of 1866, which says by its plain terms that if you are subject to a foreign power, you are not a citizen,
Yeah,
right?
it was a different law, though.
No, yeah, flat stop. But do you know when that was drafted?
When the law of 1866 was
Yeah,
drafted? No, I don't know.
it was April 1866. Do you know when the 14th Amendment was drafted?
I think it was ratified in 68, wasn't it?
It was ratified in 68. When was it drafted?
I don't know off the top of my head.
June 1866. So it's the same Congress, it's the same people. And
But they use
the
different
argue,
words? Hold on. Doesn't
yeah,
that defeat your argument? Because if they
no.
wanted it to do the same thing, they would put the same verbiage in. But because they didn't put the same verbiage in, they must have meant it to mean something different.
So the argument that you're making is that
Yeah.
the same congressman wrote came up with a completely different understanding of what they were trying to do,
No.
changed their mind completely because the foreign
Well, no,
sovereignty
that's
bit.
not my argument.
No, no, but let me just finish, and then you can rebut. But this is the thing. This was the part of the history that really stood out to me. If if you're right, if the 14th Amendment is totally contrary to the Civil Rights Act of 1866 and modified it or abrogated it or something along those lines, it's very strange that in 1870 they reenacted the Civil Rights Act of 1866, and it was good law in the country for 70 years. In fact, all the historic examples I gave about why they were denying birthright citizenship is because the 1866 law was still the law back then. And they not just kept it, they passed the Enforcement Act of 1870, in which the 1866 law was expressly reenacted.
So the 1866 Civil Rights Act applied to different things than the 14th Amendment. We agree on that, correct? Right? It was covering a whole host of different things than citizenship, correct?
Well, citizenship was one of the things it was covering.
However, they
The
used
14th Amendment
different
covers a lot of stuff
verbiage.
besides
Sure.
citizenship
They
too. Like
used
I don't know
different
your point is.
verbiage when it came to the 1866 and the later ratified 1870 Act than they did in the 1868, drafted in 1866, 14th Amendment. And the reason that they would do that, because if it was the same meaning, they would use the same words. But because they used different words, they meant different things. And because they changed the verbiage, I think, and I posit to you, that is evidence that they meant it in a different way. Because if they meant it in the same way, they just used the same verbiage.
Then why did they reenact it without changing the language?
Because it was applying to the Civil Rights Act, not the birth citizenship.
It has the same effect. It
No,
says all
one's a
persons.
constitutional amendment and
Listen to it.
one's different. Like
Listen to
it's a
the
different
language.
thing.
All persons born in the United States and not subject to any foreign power, ellipses because there's a lot of other stuff in there, shall be citizens. So they in the 1866 Act, they said that if you are subject to a foreign power, i.e., you lack political allegiance, you don't have complete jurisdiction, then you are not a citizen, even if you're born here.
Do you know the word?
But
Hold on, and let me make sure I'm correct here.
Wick, just to make sure I'm being clear on this, even after the 14th Amendment, which on your view is contrary to this law, they reenacted this law without changing it.
It's not contrary, and that's where you're getting things. The 1866 Act covered citizens, not the people born of them, right? So that's why it made exceptions for people who had allegiance to other powers, because it wasn't talking about whether you're going to being granted like citizenship at birth. It was talking about you're considered a citizen unless you have these other things here. Now, when it talks about who we grant citizenship to as a matter of birth, it had a different set of criteria. So they were covering different
Wick,
things.
the first line is that all persons born. That's how it says all persons born in the United States and not subject to any foreign power.
Let me read it here. It says defining race are equally protected by the law. Let me get the actual thing, not the summary. Hold on.
Yeah, I'm reading a version I have. Let me see if there's any other versions, but that's what I'm seeing.
That all persons born in the United States are not subject to any foreign power, excluding aliens
All
not
persons
taxed, or hereby
born.
declared to be citizens of the United States. Sure, I guess the reason I would say is, again, the Citizens Rights Act covers a different
Wick, I hate to
things.
pull the Pisco on you, but you can admit now this is about people born in the United States, right?
Yes, the word born
Okay.
is here,
Yeah.
but it's
Okay. Thanks.
covering again, it's covering a different set of things than the 14th Amendment. Could you grant me that?
I mean, they're both covering citizenship. What's
Well, again, again,
they cover a swath of things,
hold
but the
on.
thing
Would
we're
you would
interested in
you
is citizenship.
agree? Would you agree that the Civil Rights Act of 1866 covers more than the 14th Amendment does?
I don't know what more means. It covers different stuff. Like, I mean, like
Sure,
the
different
14th
stuff.
Amendment has
So
like
would it
equal
be
protection, which is
logical
a
to have
pretty
different
big doctrine.
requirements for different things? So, for
But
example, if
but
you wanted
in
to be
this
covered by the
sense, they're
14th
both talking
Amendment,
about birthright citizenship. So
hold
we're
on.
comparing the birthright citizenship provisions of both laws, right? Like I don't like they in other clauses they cover other stuff, but in the citizenship clause of both laws, they're talking about birthright citizenship. So yes, they go on to talk about other things.
Sure. Yes, and I would argue, okay, and that point is a good one, but I would argue, however, that the amendment, again, based on what they were arguing, like we don't have to go afield of the 14th Amendment debate to make these decisions. Why don't stick to the verbiage used in the 14th Amendment and stick to what the senators were saying during
Yeah,
the debate for
we're
that rule? Why
we're
are we
both
bringing in
we're both sticking to
verbiage for
that.
different, like different laws,
What we're
different
trying to figure out,
acts?
Wick, is what was meant by the phrase "subject to the jurisdiction thereof." Sorry, that's what we're trying to figure out, right? And you've pointed to language in the debates that says that it should be like basically any jurisdiction. I've pointed to
No.
language in the debates that says the complete jurisdiction, and then beyond the debates, you can also look to the broader history immediately before and immediately after to see how it was publicly understood. Because it's not purely about what the senators thought. That's not what originalism is. So when I bring up the draft of 1863, it's because that concept of complete allegiance was on their mind. When I bring up the Civil Rights Act of 1866, it's because the same Congress, the 39th Congress, wrote those words 2 months earlier. And it's very strange to think that they suddenly changed their mind, especially because the law was reenacted later. Then it becomes strange because a bunch of exceptions, like the Indians, make total sense under my rule, but are exceptions under the traditional rule. Stuff like Miss Devereaux, the German examples I gave, don't make any sense under the universal birthright citizenship rule, but are completely consistent with the way that I view the
Hold on,
history.
but that's not true. It makes perfect sense under the my universal birthright citizenship, right? It makes perfect sense that they would want people, like, I think the courts ruled incorrectly in Devereaux, and I think they ruled correctly in Wong Kim Ark. Sorry.
One can mark, but Wick, here's what I mean. Just what I'm saying. Like, here's what the U.S. Attorney General said in 1873. In a public statement that was published. The word jurisdiction must be understood to mean absolute or complete jurisdiction,
Okay,
such as the United States had over its own citizens before the adoption of this amendment. Aliens, among whom are persons born here and naturalized abroad, dwelling or being in this country, are subject to the jurisdiction of the United States only to a limited extent. Political, military rights and duties do not pertain to them.
but they don't look. The 14th Amendment applies to the children of these people. Military duties do not apply to
Yeah.
children.
So the question you would ask is, does one of the parents have
Hold on.
political
That's
allegiance
not
to
the
the United
question you would
States?
ask. The question you ask is there reasoning that would show that a baby, a child, would owe allegiance to the United States if they're born in there? And again, we have good reasoning that they would, because they are being under protection of our law. Our soldiers defend them, our military defend, or I'm repeating myself, our police officers will enforce laws, and anyone trying to violate their rights would be punished. Anyone trying to harm them would be punished. The children of anyone
Yeah.
born under our soil, where our jurisdiction reigns supreme, right, where we are in control and in charge and our sovereign rules, are again, owing allegiance, at least in part, to us. Is that not
So,
true?
Wick, if that's the theory that you're advancing,
That's a
and
theory that I would argue is put forth when we got complete allegiance. Universal birthright citizenship covers that because babies have political and legal allegiance,
no,
or jurisdiction, I should say.
the political allegiance of a child, it typically follows its parent. That's the most typical rule. And just to be clear,
Well,
and
hold
this,
on.
and
Hold on. That's
but
not
wait,
true in the last 100 years, correct?
the last 100 years where?
In the United States.
Well, yeah, because in the last 100 years we've been doing
Okay,
universal
so when
birthright
you say that's the
citizenship.
most typical thing, at least not in the United States, it ain't.
Yeah, though if we're going to talk broader policy, every single European country that I
Sure, we're
can
not
think of
talking
that
about
had
those. We're talking about the
that
United
they
States.
have abandoned birthright citizenship because it doesn't work. But beyond that point, this is another issue with adopting the British common law as a part of our law. If we were going to look to what the term meant at the time, Wick, one thing we might do is I've talked about various scholars. Are you familiar with Black's Law Dictionary?
Not entirely, no.
So for those of you who aren't lawyers, Black's Law Dictionary is the dictionary that you all have to buy when you go to law school. It's the one that everyone looks at to what the words mean. Like if you're looking up a legal term, that's where you look it up. And as we have it, Henry Campbell Black was an author who was writing in 1910. And Henry Campbell Black, the author of Black's Law Dictionary, also wrote a book called his Handbook of American Constitutional Law. And in 1910, after Juan Kim Ark, by the way, after Juan Kim Ark, he said, the jurisdiction, again, 14th Amendment, must at the time be both actual and exclusive. So if a stranger or traveler passing through the country or temporarily residing here, but who has not himself been naturalized and who claims to owe no allegiance to our government, has a child born here who goes out of the country with his father, such child is not a citizen of the United States because he was not subject to its jurisdiction. So what I'm getting at, Wick, is that yes, I would concede because it's true, and I have to, that modern practice is universal birthright citizenship, as you say. Certainly past 1950. Before that, you can quibble about it, but at the time, even after Juan Kim Ark was passed, the most significant legal scholars seemed to disagree, and the government seemed to disagree because they weren't giving birthright citizenship to everybody. It's only in the recent past that consensus
So
developed on this
what
path.
court decided the Devereaux case? I'm just really curious.
At that point, these decisions were made. I think Devereaux was made by the Department of Justice.
So a
They weren't
court
these weren't
didn't
court
decide
cases.
it.
No, a co-equal branch of government did.
Okay, so in other words, judicial branch, right, did not make a decision. It was by fiat. So yes,
I'm
I'm
not sure what
not
you mean.
going to tout.
Yeah.
Why would we take into account non-judicial rulings when it comes to what they meant? Just
Why?
because just some
Wait,
executive,
are you
right,
taking the
decided to be
position
like,
that only the
I think it
are
means
you
this.
are you taking the position
Wow,
that
that's a
only
very
the
big misrepresentation of what happened there.
are you? It's not a
It
misrepresentation.
absolutely is.
I never said a court decided it.
Oh, you implied it.
I no, in fact, I told you it was the Department of Justice, and I said the Secretary of State did it for the Germans. Whether or not you were listening carefully enough to recognize that is not my fault. I did say it, and I never said it was a
You
court.
snuck it in.
A,
Sure.
B, Wick, your listening comprehension is not my problem, buddy.
Fair enough.
I had a public debate where I made all these points super clearly on stage recently. If you want, I'm not hiding the ball any of this. Second, if you're making the argument that only the courts have the power to determine constitutional meaning, your argument is ahistoric
That's not the
and
argument I'm
contrary to
making.
our law.
I'm making that if two
Executive
things come into
practice
conflict, if we have a
executive
court
practice
decision
has
that
a
comes into
lot
conflict
to
with the,
do with the
if I
meaning.
may finish, if we have a court decision that comes into conflict with something the executive branch or another branch of government has said, again, according to U.S. law, we take the court decision as to be higher than that of those.
Not always, but often. Yeah. I
In
mean,
almost all cases.
So increasingly modern times, yes. If you go back in history, the co-equal branches of government had much more prominent roles than they do today. Certainly, I mean, if you go all the way back to the founding, there wasn't even
Okay,
an understanding
sure,
that the
yeah.
courts would
If we
actually
go
rule
before
on
maybe
issues
like
like
if we go
this.
before they
Yeah,
they got like the
well, let's
ability
say
to
this is an
make the
evolving
decision,
this is an
sure.
evolving historic understanding. But then, Wick, even if you go further forward in history, like let's say you flash forward to the 1930s, we had a guest work program with Mexico. 2 million Mexicans came in. I think the estimate, and we'll never know, but the estimate is they had like 400,000 children born in the United States. And they were expatriated largely voluntarily, but not always. There were many deportations. And guess what? Not a single claim for birthright citizenship because nobody thought they had it. And in the 1930s, if you applied for a US passport, this has changed since then, but in the 1930s, you had to list both where you were born and your parents' political allegiance, which of course would be totally
Are we
unnecessary.
talking under
On
FDR?
this is 19. I think this changed in 38.
No, I'm talking
I
about the Mexican immigrants. Are we talking
Yeah,
under
that
FDR?
was 1920s, 1930s.
Okay, so
The
not under
guest work
FDR.
program
Gotcha. I just
is
wanted to make sure.
predating is
Yeah.
yeah, it's the Great Depression. Though we had another guest work program in the 1950s. The record I've looked at is less clear. I didn't see birthright citizenship claims from the Brissario program, but there could have been. I will not purport that I exhaustively mined that one. The point that I'm making though, Wick, is that yes, of course, you have Juan Kimark, and yes, the courts prior to Wong Kim Ark came out, talked about the 14th Amendment completely differently. And the federal government did not seem to understand Wong Kim Ark as requiring birthright citizenship for people whose parents were here temporarily. The legal scholars of that period did not understand Wong Kim Ark as requiring that. And the government didn't act as if it was required. It's only in like the 1940s, 1950s, somewhere in there, that we reached consensus on this point. Not because of anything a court said, it was just the government practice changed.
So let me read a few of these super chats. But like this, again, we can
You're
acknowledge,
doing way better than Pisco did, by
sure,
the way.
but we can acknowledge, like just off the cuff, I think that the U.S. government has not always correctly followed its own law. There
Sure.
are plenty of instances. The reason I asked about FDR is because FDR did this a lot, right? I think most famously the internment camps for the Japanese, right? Where they did not follow the law of the land and the Constitution and violated the constitutional rights of these people. This was later rewarded. They were given recompense because the courts recognized that their constitutional rights were violated in such an egregious way. And so simply citing that, oh, in certain instances, the U.S. government did not follow the law, does not. I guess it doesn't. It doesn't convince me. It doesn't persuade. Let me read some of these super chats, and then you can respond to that. $5 from Mad Money Max USA. Ooh, thank you. If I understand Ryan correctly on the discretion of the citizenship of a legal temp, etc., then whose discretion is it? The states or the federal government?
You're asking me what the rule
Yeah,
would
what? Who would
be.
decide the citizenship? Would it be? I guess this guy's asking whether it's state decided or federal government. Like, so could some
It
states
would probably
decide?
be. I mean, we're asking about what would
Sure.
happen if the court ruled in the way I think they
Yeah, and
should.
they made the distinction between
Hypothetically,
illegal and
I
temporary.
think it would be the federal government, but it's really. I mean, I'm kind of reading the
I don't
tea
know.
leaves here, right?
Yeah,
I don't know.
just asking. Okay, $10 from Deadly Sin. If it policy, if the policy, then we would be dealing with flip flopping based on the administration. So if you're born during a R term, no citizenship. If born during a D administration, yes citizenship. That's crazy.
That's not crazy. That's like at the time when this was ratified, Wick and I agree, Native Americans did not get birthright citizenship. In 1924, Congress passed a law. Now they get birthright citizenship. The idea that birthright citizenship, like if you're born abroad, you get birthright citizenship because of a law that Congress passed. If Congress rescinded that law and you were born abroad, there's nothing in the Constitution that requires that you're a citizen. So, the idea that Congress has control over citizenship isn't weird. It's the default. The only extent that it doesn't have control over citizenship is the extent that the 14th Amendment applies.
Sure, but we can, and just to steelman this guy's point, because I see what he's driving at, is one, we don't make laws a lot through Congress anymore. It's almost all governance by executive order these days. And we can
These days.
imagine a scenario where Trump makes an executive order uh, denying these people citizenship. Then the next administration becomes Democrat and they make an executive order overturning that executive order. And then 4 years later, the Republicans win again and the thing switches. And so you have this kind of weird lottery of time where some people are citizens during some years, some people are citizens during others, and kind of the logistical kind of nightmare that would
That's
ensue
not. I
between
mean
constantly switching.
that's what democracy is. In a democracy, the elected officials get to decide what the policy is, unless the Constitution has settled the issue completely. Since I'm merely arguing the Constitution has not settled this issue completely as to the discrete category of most. I'd say let's focus on temporary because I think it's the better argument
Sure.
of people who are here temporarily, and of those that which means that there's policy discretion. And with policy discretion, that means the policy discretion could be exercised. That's not weird. That's what policy
Well,
discretion means.
yeah, again, to steal me on his point, it's just it would be kind of a logistical nightmare in a lot of ways.
A
But
lot of things. The First Amendment is a
sure,
logistical
fair
nightmare.
enough.
It is what it is.
$10
Yeah,
from J Ray. Thank you for the $10 to say if jurisdiction and complete jurisdiction were two separate concepts, why did they not use the words complete jurisdiction? And they are separate if they were arguing about what it meant. I don't know
because you could
what the last line means, but
you could also say the concept of territorial jurisdiction, which is what Wick is really talking about, is distinct from jurisdiction. Why didn't they use the phrase territorial jurisdiction? As the Supreme Court's explained, the word jurisdiction is one of those words that is subject to too many meanings. That was Justice Ginsburg that I was quoting, because it means complete, territorial, personal, subject matter. It's a word that has a lot of meanings. The question that Wick and I are driving at, and the reason we're analyzing the history in such depth, is when they said subject to the jurisdiction thereof, what did they mean by that phrase? So yeah, I mean they could have meant territorial jurisdiction. They could have meant complete jurisdiction. That's the argument.
yeah,
but I think
I would argue that even under your definition, and they are meaning complete jurisdiction, then the children of temporary citizens even would apply. It would apply. They would the children obviously owe political and legal jurisdiction to
but I disagree with you, and that's the draft.
well, yeah, that's the
No,
argument, right? We
because
disagree.
because people are, this is the. I don't want to accuse you of anything, but
You can accuse me. It's okay.
by focusing on the kids, I think that what you're almost missing the thrust of the draft example, right?
I never miss a thrust.
Yeah,
Go
if
ahead.
those if those like Frenchmen and Englishmen who couldn't be drafted had kids, those kids were Frenchmen and Englishmen. Those are who those kids were. The political allegiance in follows the political allegiance of the parent. So I understand that on the theory of universal birthright citizenship, the kids' political allegiance is where they were is to America because they were born here. But that borders on circular because you're assuming that universal birthright citizenship
it's not
applies
because they were
to get
born
to the
here.
fact that
Is they were
then
born
why?
in a place where we have they are under our care de facto, right? Where our
not Native
military
Americans
protects
back
them,
then.
where our police protects them, that they are protected
Mhm.
by us, and therefore they owe us allegiance.
But that was true of Native Americans back then, right? Like if they were
No,
born,
because again, they weren't protected
if
by
they
our
were
laws.
born, yeah, they sure were. If they
In
were
certain
born
cases, yes. In certain
in certain
cases,
cases, yes.
no.
In certain cases, no. Right? Well,
But
if you're born,
what could you do that would be against the law to an illegal immigrant's kid? That you couldn't what can you do to an illegal immigrant kid that you can't do to a normal kid or a citizen kid, I should say. I can't
well,
think
I
of
mean,
anything.
I think the question is what's going to happen when they grow up. Like, if you think about like one way to look at it is think about the slaves who were freed,
No.
right? Who was their political allegiance to? Was it to a country they've never been to in Africa? Is it really reasonable to think that they could be drafted by some potentate in Africa they've never known? Or was their political allegiance to the country that freed them? The thing about focusing on the kids, Wick, is that it assumes the conclusion in that your it's just kind of moving past the fact that if what's meant is political allegiance, it would be trivially true, as it is in all legal systems that do anything similar to this, that the political allegiance of a child follows that of its parent. There's really no other possible outcome. So
Why would that be true, though?
that's how it works in literally every legal system that's not Joe Soli.
Okay, so yes, in countries that do it differently than us, it's done differently. That's a trivial argument. Of course, that's true.
No,
But
so
in
if
countries that do it the way we do, right?
yeah,
My argument stands.
well, wait, yes, but if we incorporated jus soli or English common law birthright citizenship,
Yeah.
you win by default. My point is that we didn't, and since we didn't, we might want to think about how countries that didn't do that handle citizenship, and they handle it the way I'm suggesting. So, obviously, yes, you're right that if we have adopted the English common law of jus soli into the 14th Amendment, then obviously I'm wrong. Like, obviously, I'm wrong. I would just lose the entire argument then. But if we assume that's true, there's nothing left to talk about. I'm assuming that's not true, and saying in the situation where that's not true, then the allegiance of the parent, the kid would follow the parent because that's the only logical option. There's nothing else you could really even do.
$10. Let me get a little more money. 10 Canadian. Oh, Canadian dollars. Okay, this isn't just solely. Well, hold on.
That's like 550.
I look, it's money, and I'll take it. What are Ryan's sources for Gresser case and the Devereaux case? Can you provide a link? Is it just Amy Swearer's paper? What court decided these
Who,
cases?
well, it's not a court. We
Well,
already talked about
but
that.
it would be helpful to have the link, and I'll just post it.
Yeah, what you should do is you should Google Amy Swearer Birthright Citizenship PDF. It'll pop. One of the first links will be her law review article. She has extensive citations for all of this. It's going to be a lot easier to do that than for me to link, one by one,
Okay.
a bunch of stuff into the chat.
Okay, Google it, gang.
It's a great. Also, you should read it. It's a really good law review article, and if this ends up being a winning argument, she's gonna be one of the architects of why. I mean, like her brief was cited extensively in the amici.
Ted Cruz's amicus brief. Yeah, I did read his amicus brief, by the way.
And this is a weird one because this is again backing off the argument for a second, because we haven't reached the merits at the Supreme Court yet. We were just the arguments before the Supreme Court right now are just about whether the court should hear the case, not what the merits are. So the party briefs are actually less helpful than the amicus briefs at this point. I found the amicus briefs in many ways to be more useful. So if you're really interested in the topic, don't limit yourself to the party briefs. Read the amicus briefs. They're pretty good.
Okay. $5 from Gelatinous Rube. Well, oops, my chat says it wasn't a court ruling, and I thought that would be conclusive. I wasn't prepared for Ryan to know whether that was material at all, end quote. Thank you for the $5. I think that's it for now. But, I don't know. And to be clear, I'm not a lawyer. I'm gonna be real.
You're doing better than the lawyer I debated. Don't worry about it.
But I don't know. I think that whether I'm gonna move off of legality for a moment. Real quick, $5 from J Ray to say, if two concepts existed at the same time and they chose one, why not go with what they wrote? They knew both and chose one. Well, we're arguing about which one they chose. Thank you for the $5. Moving off from the legal argument here, and getting to why I think no matter what the courts decide, we should have universal birthright citizenship. I think that the idea that we have a birth crisis, a birth rate crisis in America right now, and it's across the world, where we just aren't making enough kids, bros. Okay, there's not enough babies. There's not enough people. Okay, we have an aging population that's going to drain us dry of trying to take care of them. By giving citizenship to everyone who is born within our borders, I think we help to solve that problem. I think that we should be looking to make citizens of even more people. I think that there is a point where it would be a strain on our resources, but I do not think that we have reached even close to that point. I think that there's a lot of fear mongering out there about saying, oh, we can't afford X, you can't afford a house, it's because of the immigrants. Your health care is high, it's because of the immigrants. The crime's high, it's because of the immigrants. But when we look at things, right, crime, for example, crime's down across the board, especially since the 90s, right? It's just like super down. And we've had a huge increase of immigrants, and yet our crime is down. So obviously, we can have immigrants even and keep crime low. So I from a moral perspective, I would advocate that we keep universal birthright citizenship in place. I think it's just a better system. It's cleaner, and there's less fluff about it. But that's my argument there.
Yeah, the thing about universal birthright citizenship, and this is kind of an interesting in the weeds point that we didn't get to in sort of the policy and the debate, is that when you look at like illegal immigration as a whole, birthright citizenship is actually a very tiny fragment of it. It actually is. You can make the argument that it's the magnet that it draws people over here, but by the numbers, it's actually not a huge percentage of what we're talking about. But the problem with universal birthright citizenship is it constitutionally prevents the country from dealing with the fringe cases on the margins instead of having a policy that could be a little bit more nuanced and careful. So, like, I use this in the debate, but I'll read it here because I just think it's so useful to understand the problem. This is what Judge Posner, and if you don't know who he is, Judge Posner is a very, very famous, respected U.S. judge, not a Supreme Court judge, a Seventh Circuit judge, and he wrote in the case of 4G v. Ashcroft. There is a huge and growing industry in Asia that arranges tourist visas for pregnant women so they can fly to the United States and give birth to an American. Obviously, this was not the intent of the 14th Amendment. It makes a mockery of citizenship. And I think that's actually the question that we're asking, Wick. It's like, if someone flies here, they're here for 3-4 weeks. They give birth to the child. They take the child back to China. They raise them as a Chinese citizen with Chinese values. And then later, they want to go to school here. They want to vote here. It becomes convenient for one of many reasons. We have a pretty great country. The kid comes back and says, I'm an American. Are we constitutionally required to honor that in a case where it's clear that this is done to take advantage of what's perceived as a loophole in our system?
I think that like your run up to this answered it. It's a vanishingly small case of these things happening. It costs money to do this, and a lot of the people that are coming to this country, you know, we want richer people to come to this country. I would argue that it is in our interest.
You got to pick. You just said it was important to solve. You just said a second ago it was important to solve the birth crisis. So
yes.
if you're gonna accept my vanishingly small in comparison figure, that means your last argument has to be thrown out the window.
No, because even if it's a small increment towards it, I think it's an increment towards it. And why would we take away this? I think the benefits outweigh the pros outweigh the cons in this case. And I would also argue that the dangers of adjusting what the jurisdiction means, right? The dangers of elimination of the universal birthright citizenship is it kind of opens a door to people to adjust it further. Like, you remember that scene in Star Wars where Darth Vader's like, that wasn't the plan, and Darth Vader's like, oh, I'm adjusting the plan. Pray I don't adjust it further. And he like chokes out the guy. There are people who are in our government right now who don't just want to end illegal immigration. They talk, and again, the official White House accounts have talked about remigration. Do you know what remigration is?
Sure, but it has nothing to do with this case.
I disagree. I think that when you
move out,
hold on, if I may make my argument, if you move out from the legal, like, nitty gritty, when we look at like, okay, what are they trying to accomplish by doing this? I think you can make a very strong argument that the people in charge are, again, pushing towards and going for remigration.
They had a very funny way of doing it because when they wrote President Trump's executive order on this topic, it's prospective only, meaning it does not affect the citizenship of anybody who was born before February of 2026. And even then, it won't go into effect because of the stay by the court. So that's going to be even further in the future. But it has Nothing to do with taking citizenship away from anyone who already has it, only people who were born later. And to the extent that we're talking about what the Supreme Court should do, which is really the heart of the conversation, that issue is not even before the court. And if it were before the court, he would lose easily. It would be a slam dunk loss because of a bunch of other legal doctrines. So, I think that there's a lot of fear mongering around this topic because people don't like Trump and they don't like his policies, and I get that. But the issue that's being decided is not whether to take citizenship away from anybody who has it. The issue is whether we are required
This
to give
is
citizenship to people going forward if their mother was only here
we
temporarily and
would
their
be
father doesn't have
yeah,
status.
we would be foolish to think that this is once they do this, they're going to be done. This is what's called the thin end of the wedge. They start small with something easy that they can think that they can pass, or I don't think it's easy in this case, but they do. It's easier than, as you said, if they were trying to do this not proscriptively, but like rescriptively or whatever the word is, like they would obviously lose. So they start small, thin end of the wedge, kind of drive this idea home of they can choose and change what it means to be a citizen of the United States, because you would acknowledge that any change to the 14th Amendment would fundamentally change the modern American idea of what it means to be a citizen in the United States, correct?
Well, they can change it compared to the status quo, which is, if I'm right and if the
Which,
court says I'm right, not constitutionally required. So of course it can be changed. The idea that the government can change policy for things not required by the Constitution is bog standard. It's obvious. It's of course true. So, I'm not concerned that the government has control over something over which they should have control. That's why the legal part matters so much, Wick, because if I'm right and if temporary was never part of subject to the jurisdiction there too, then this has all just been a policy decision all along. But if you're right, of course, then it's a constitutional requirement. And that's what we're arguing about. But if it's a policy decision, there's no issue
yes,
with the government
that's my
changing
point.
policy.
If it's a policy decision, then they
Then
can
people
make
change
further policies that change it further.
only to the extent that it is not required by the 14th Amendment. Like there's no historic argument, for example, that you could limit birthright citizenship for Americans who gave birth to children while in the country. There's no historic argument for it. So it's not like I'm arguing for an elastic term with no meaning. I'm saying that there is a specific historic meaning that specific historic meaning can be given the overlay of the holding of Wong Kim Ark, because Wong Kim Ark's parents were not here temporarily. And you could get to the conclusion that if your parents were here temporarily and neither parent had status, that you can be excluded from birthright citizenship on all fours with the 14th Amendment, on all fours with Wong Kim Ark. That's the argument, not that it's some whole cloth novel interpretation.
Yeah, I just think you underestimate what people are wanting and what they were being willing to do. And if one of the things, it's not just the law that protects us in the Constitution. It's not just the law, but it's um the culture around our laws and our systems, right? It's the culture and the beliefs in those systems and in the fact that they will work for us and in how they work that create this kind of shield, if you will, that would, I'm worried, will be weakened if you allow in this change to what, again, we believed for, I would argue, over 100 years, and you would argue since the 50s, right? But for decades and decades, longer than I've been
Yeah.
alive, what
Well,
it
wait, let,
means to be a citizen of the United
let, let,
States.
let me lay a hypothetical on you. Instead of a company, because we know these companies exist in Asia, and we also know that, but it's very tragic. A lot of women who are pregnant who don't have money just cross the border to give birth here at great risk to themselves and the child. But let's set that aside for a second. Let's imagine a not so crazy hypothetical where someone in the government of China or someone in the government of Russia said, it'd be really useful? A bunch of American citizens who reported back to our country. And let's say that they had a bunch of a surrogate program where they had a bunch of women who got pregnant. They artificially inseminated them. They sent them over to America. They gave birth here. They took the kids back and they raised them as FSB agents. Your position is that we are constitutionally incapable of saying that even if we know all of those things, that FSB agent is not a U.S. citizen. We're
However,
required,
we can limit them through other laws, right?
but we can't say they're not a
Treason
citizen.
and other things, right? We can absolutely do that. We could do that to citizens. You can be charged for treason
Yeah.
if you are a citizen. You could be charged with crimes against the government if you were a citizen. I worry that this first of all, I disagree with you that this is a realistic hypothetical. I think that this is
Whoa,
wild science fiction.
for the record, if it occurred to me, and I was only thinking about this for a week, it definitely occurred to Vladimir Putin, the ex-KGB agent. Like, this is not a complicated thing to get to in terms of the logic.
Yeah, but if you
Occurred,
think about it for
it,
like more than 5 minutes, you can understand how this is unworkable, and that's why they're not implementing
why?
this.
How is it unworkable? There are
It's
companies
unworkable
that,
because as soon as we see that happening, we would put policies and implement laws in place that wouldn't deny them
but,
citizenship or would
but
limit
Wick,
them in other
we
ways.
there are companies in China that do exactly this, and we have nothing in place to stop it. And by the way, the border between a company in China and the government in China, not exactly firm. These, there's no actual way of knowing which companies are doing government
And one
policies
of
and which
the
ones aren't. That's why we're so
sure,
frustrated with China all the
yeah,
time.
and one of the actual really strong things that America has going for it, right, is our wealth and our freedom. And it turns out that if you have the ability to escape China or Putin's Russia and actually come here and get the benefits of citizenship here, people tend to do that.
Yeah,
And so this idea that they would come and create this FSB agent, right, under Putin, or this Chinese agent under China, they would just defect, and they have, and we have a historical precedent of this happening, even
some of
with
them.
like scientists,
Yeah,
and military members and people
some
in
of
high
the
positions of power in these
some
other
of them
forms of
would
government.
defect. I'm sure some of them would defect. I think you're probably right about that. But the question I'm asking isn't about whether or not we have one policy or the other. I'm asking whether we get to have any policy decisions at all. Because on your view, there's no flexibility here to deal with these new issues politically. There's no flexibility because the
I get
Constitution
that.
has taken the flexibility away. That's what the
Only when it
Constitution
comes to
does.
declaring them
It
a
creates
citizen.
the Constitution doesn't create flexibility, it creates rigidity. That's what it's for. It takes things out of the democratic process. I'm merely suggesting that if we are not required to do this by the Constitution, and I think I've given some reasons to think why maybe we're not, then we shouldn't because it's a bad idea. On your view, there's no decision point at all.
Again, I reject that framing. We have other decision points. We just can't take away their citizenship, but we can restrict them in other ways. And there are other laws that we can pass that would put a damper on any kinds of foreign interference, influence, and all these things. Like, we already have this in place with funding, for example. Even if you're an American citizen, if you're receiving foreign funding, you got to report that. You got to do these things. So we have laws in place that would limit any kind of
So, Wick,
kind of danger we would be in
are
from
you
something like
saying
this.
that if this hypothetical was borne out, and if there was and let's say there was some defection, but there's also some success, and ended up having a certain percentage of potential, we don't know for sure, but potential FSB agents that we are required to give passports to, that we are required to let into the country whenever they want. You don't think that that creates any challenge? There's no problem there at
What
all.
would the challenge? What do, like, worst case scenario? We do this in a how many? Like, what are we thinking? 10,000 FSB agents? A million? 10 million? What are we talking about?
I don't know. I mean, that's what I'm saying.
Do you know
there's
how
ton.
hard it would be? They can't imagine them. Imagine them training 10 million FSB agents and the
Well, 10 million
costs.
10 million is a big number, but
Yeah,
you
yeah.
wouldn't. It would not take a lot of people to swing a local election. It would not take a lot of people to get one of them elected to something. It would not take a lot of people to get somebody in a position of power or information or influence. So, I mean, I'm not saying that these things, Wick, are necessarily happening. I'm saying that, like, there are policy considerations on the other side. And since we're just talking policy,
Sure.
I think that policy ought to be decided politically. And politically, we all know where the government's at right now. So, yeah, I think ultimately, I don't think I'm going to convince you. Obviously, I didn't expect to, but I
Well, we're
do.
debating.
Yeah, yeah,
We're
no,
having
no,
fun.
no.
It's a good time.
Yeah, no, you never. People are like, oh, you never try to convince the person you're talking to. It's like that's a silly thing to even try to do. That's what debate is. But I do think, if I'm taking off my advocate hat for a second, the historic case for the position I'm arguing, even if you disagree with it, is substantially stronger than people who haven't looked into it believe. There's a lot of evidence here. Now, maybe you think the evidence on Wick's side of the ledger is better. That's fine. But I would encourage you to read Amy Swearer's article, to read the amicus briefs, to look at the history, because the history is not one-sided the way that I certainly believed before I started doing the research.
Okay. Well, we are running out of time today
And
for
Wick,
this.
oh my God, I have a super chat I have to
Oh,
ask you
ask the
apparently.
super chat. Let's hear it.
Wick, are children born overseas stateless?
No, because we all not only do we have just Soli, but we have just sanguine. In other words, birth by blood, right?
Yeah.
And that's not
Though I'm
constitutional. That's law, right? Well, I think it is constitutional with 14th Amendment, but we have laws about that too, right?
It's not constitutional. It's a law. We, on your view, just to make sure we clear it out, we
Sure.
don't have the common law of jus sanguine. We have the other one.
Well, we can
So
have
we
both,
would
can't we? By
no.
blood and soil. That's
I
a
don't think
common
so
phrase.
because I like the because
Blood and soil is
Rome.
something I hear all the time.
Yeah, because
So,
Rome, jus sanguine came from Rome, and then jus soli came from England. So they are somewhat contradictory traditions. Like they just arose historically in different places. And like they're also, and this is kind of the fucked up thing, but if you think about like the feudal English context, they're mutually incompatible because the fight in England wasn't about where do you get your rights, it's about which lord do you owe allegiance to. So if you have both, and like let's say your parents were somewhere else, then the two lords both have allegiance to you, but whose field are you forced to work in? That's the question, right? Whose subject are you? So you can't really have both. It would be.
I don't think like it might have historically in the case of England. I just don't know enough about England to say that might be the case, but we have that today. Like
Oh
that
yeah,
is the American
but
situation. So
not
it
because of
obviously
jus
works
sanguine. We don't have it because of jus sanguine. We have it because we passed a law.
based on just jus sanguine though. Like
Well, I don't know what it's based on. Like it's not a common law
yeah,
issue.
but the concept
It's a
completely maps
positive law
on
issue.
with jus sanguine.
Oh yeah, it lines up. I'm saying it's not
Yeah, yeah,
common
yeah.
law.
Okay.
This is like a when you say jus sanguine, you're invoking a common law.
Okay, well maybe
Um,
the technical
or,
legal term may be different, but fair enough.
yeah,
Two dollars
I can
from
get lawyer brain too.
Sure. $2 from Salient8 to say Ryan is so insecure about Pisco and immigrants. Well, thank you for the $2. But before you go, actually, I did have and we can't take too much time on this because I don't have too much time left tonight. Um, but I am curious in your opinion, from what you know, of the ice shooting. Not just the legal opinion, but your overall opinion. I'm just really curious.
Oh yeah, so I am not deep in the weeds on this. So I'm going to admit that I know less factually and have not researched this. So
Sure.
I'm going kind of off first principles
Yeah, I'm not
and
going to
like,
debate you on this. I'm just
yeah,
asking
yeah.
your opinion. Yeah.
My gut instinct, and I think I would hope most people would understand why this comes out the way it is. I don't think he should have shot her. I also don't think he's legally accountable for shooting her. I think that the odds of him getting prosecuted and convicted are vanishingly slim for a variety of legal reasons. It didn't look like a necessary shoot morally, but that's not the question legally.
No, that makes sense. And gang, if you want to see me actually debate that subject again, you can tomorrow. We're all going to be going on Sitch and Adam to talk not only about the Renee Good shooting, right? And this is at 2 p.m. Eastern, so tune in early, gang. But also, we're going to be talking about anonymity, right? Is it a good thing that ICE agents have anonymity by wearing masks and not having to wear badges and things? I say no. I say it's a bad thing. and we're going to be debating about that tomorrow, and it should be fun. What do you got coming up, Ryan? What's on your docket?
So had a big day today. On Friday, I'm actually jumping on Benjamin Boyce's show, which should be interesting. I haven't done that before, so haven't met him. Don't know how that'll go, but that should be fun. That's happening during the day. I think I'm doing another Birthright Citizenship event next Thursday on Sarah Tomato's show. So we'll see how that goes. I'm trying to hold the Sunday dates, even though the Order Liberty podcast is on hiatus until Gen Z Attorney is able to stream again. But that's I'm trying to hold those Sunday dates. And yeah, big stuff. Oh, Law and Order on next Monday, where I'm sure we'll do more debate review. And if you want to see how much better Wick did than Pisco on this legal topic, please feel free to watch the debate. It's on my channel, where you'll see that Pisco raised none of the historic arguments that Wick raised today. So, Wick, I appreciate you having some command of the history. I think that's actually what the court's going to be arguing about, is like the history you presented and the history I presented. So I think if you're acquainted with that, when the decision comes out, you'll understand what happened.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. And we'll see, I guess. Tune in to all of Ryan's stuff. I have a link to his channel, Natural Law with Ryan Mullally, in my YouTube description. You should go there. You should click it. You should give him a follow, give him a subscribe, give him all these things. And gang, if
Sub
you
to
want,
me. Come over and yell at me.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
fun.
And gang, if you like the content, remember, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. We're gonna say bye to Ryan. We're not ending the stream, but we are saying goodbye to Ryan right now. I'll see you later. Bye. Bye.
Good to
Bye.
see you, Wick.
Did you guys have fun? Was that good? Did you enjoy it? It was a quasi debate. I did debate him on things, but it wasn't like an official debate with opening statements, closing statements, all that, right? So, and again, I'm not like super well researched on these things, but it is something that I have looked into, and I just, well, as I said, I disagree. I think it's pretty strongly in favor, and I'm willing to put money on this. It's going to be 9-0-8-1 against Trump on the decision here, but we'll see. $2 from J Ray to say Wick owned just like Pisco. Well, thank you for the $2. I do appreciate that. Again, I didn't see the Pisco Ryan debate, so I can't speak. And this is what people forget, because Old Scotty says Ryan is wrong on the topic, but he was able to relay his position in the debate better than Pisco did. That might be true, right? Like there's this idea that you have to if you have the correct position, you automatically win the debate, and I disagree with that. I disagree. I have seen a few debates, to be clear. I've seen a few debates where I agreed with the position that one of the people had, but they just did not do well. And you can't just automatically give the debate to them. Like I've been thinking like how do we judge a winner of a debate? Like what criteria should be used to judge who did better in a debate? Is it persuasion only? Is it command of facts? What are we talking about here? And that's something that I think is a little subjective. Like different people will put emphasis on different things. But there is this tendency in these spaces, and not just these spaces. Let's be real, just a tendency in general, to have what I like to call tribalist brain rot, where you will defend your side to the death despite all evidence. And no matter how your guy does, you're going to vote for him because he's your guy. You're going to say he won because he's your guy, right? Don't do that. It makes you stupid. It makes your debaters weaker. It makes them worse because they're getting a false idea of how they're doing because you just keep hyping them up and gassing them up. And they need to, if they do poorly, they need to be told they do poorly. So, a lot of people don't understand that concept, and a lot of people will say that, oh, I'm judging objectively and fairly, and it's obviously not true. And you can see that a lot. But it's very easy to pick out usually. But Old Scotty says, I don't know why, but Pisco was off his game. Maybe it was a format. Standing up. Again, I didn't watch the debate because I tried to, but I tuned out after like the first 10 minutes because the audio just sucked. I couldn't hear what Ryan was saying. Yeah, I should have told him, bro, if you're in a debate setting, the mic goes here. The mic goes here. Okay, in a live setting, when you're holding the mic, it goes here. Not here, not here, here. It goes here. Okay, you talk into the mic. And he wasn't doing that, and so I couldn't hear him. Apparently, they have versions where they adjusted the audio and they improved the audio, and the audio is better. But the version I was watching, the audio just wasn't there. On the word war debate thing, I don't know, man. The production values, I mean, they made choices I would not have made. Let's say that. I'm talking about production aesthetics. The two most important things when you're doing a live event and you're doing a live production are audio. That's number one. You want good audio overall, right? And lighting, okay? Audio and lighting. Their lighting sucked, okay? Those are the two most important things. But yeah, that's what it is. Did you guys have anything you want to talk to me tonight? Anything you wanted to go over with me? Anything at all? Okay, I will see you tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern. Tune in. I'm going to be facing Sitch and Adam. Again, what I'm arguing is, and I want to be very clear with my position, the ICE agent who shot Renee Good acted unnecessarily and immorally. I am not making a legal argument tomorrow. It does not matter. The second thing I will be arguing is that ICE should be forced by law to wear nameplates and badges. And the fact that they aren't is, and also go unmasked. Other than maybe for the cold or something, like if you have like earmuffs or some shit, right? That's fine. But like, you shouldn't be wearing masks as an agent of the state, as an ICE agent. The only exceptions I could give to that is if you're undercover or some shit. Okay, but in the ordinary carrying out of your duties, you should not be wearing a mask as an agent of the state. I just don't think there's any good reason for that to be the case. Old Scotty says, Wick, did you watch Hutch on Sitch and Adam? He had that discussion with him. I watched some of it, but not all of it. Yeah, look, when I say leftist corporation, when I say like undercover, I mean there are certain like extreme conditions or extraordinary circumstances, special circumstances where we would allow exceptions to the ordinary rules of things. There are few, they're far between. They should be extremely limited, but I can just see that under certain conditions, sure. But I don't think those conditions exist for people and ICE agents going and invading Minnesota and executing their orders, right? Hector Review says, I should mandatory need badges and unmask and body cams. I think body cams is a good idea, too. Yeah. Debate Boar says, recall when this started, they weren't wearing masks. Fair enough. You can still do things wrong when you're not wearing masks. What does that have to do with my point? I'm not sure. But fair enough. Solemn Argus says, I think there was no good reason for universal birthright to begin with. We are in times where we need to be making limitations, not expanding unnecessary absolute freedoms for the sake of it. Well, I disagree with that, obviously. I think there's a very good reason to have universal birthright citizenship even today. And again, as I argued, I think it was the norm up until very recently, at least in America. So, Debate Board says C ignored the point. I had which? Hold on. What point do you say I'm ignoring? You made the point about recall when this started, they weren't wearing masks, and I said, okay, that's not my point. How is that not addressing what you said? I'm just really curious. Debate Board says, Wick, when this started, the agents didn't wear masks. They've been wearing masks since for over a year. What do you mean? Don't dox them and masks will not be needed? That's not true. Why would the argument change? They would just say, we need these masks because the left will dox us. And if no one doxed them, they'd still say, well, they might dox us. That would be the argument. You know how many ICE agents died last year? No ICE agents died last year. There's no real threat to them. None. Zero. Goose egg. When I was in the military, I was required to wear a name tape, okay? I was required to identify myself and to wear a uniform, okay? Why was I done that? So I could be held accountable if I broke the rules. So that there would be some accountability that the public could hold me to. Okay? If you were trying to argue that military members don't face threats of being doxxed, you're fucking stupid. We just had 2 National Guard guys got killed recently, shot in the streets in Washington, D.C., right? They would be safer if they didn't have to wear uniforms, but we require them to wear uniforms. Why? The idea that we can have secret police going around dragging people from cars and arresting them, throwing them in vans and driving away, and you think that that's going to be a good thing or a positive thing is wild to me. Like, why would you ever think that? I'm getting one guide, but that's okay. This is easy dunks, right? The idea that what you want is a state where agents of the state, or they might be, they might not be, you don't know, because they don't have to identify themselves. They put on a mask, they go in, they grab someone from the street, they throw them in a van. How do you know who they are? How are you supposed to know? So say an ICE agent or an ICE agent comes up to you, pops you in the face, steals your wallet, and you call him up like, yo, hey, I was just accosted and my rights were violated by this ICE agent. And they're like, okay, what's he look like? He had a mask. Okay, what was his name? He wasn't wearing a badge or anything. How are we supposed to hold that person accountable? And if you think, well, the left might dox them, so we shouldn't hold our agents of the state accountable, I'm going to laugh you out of the room if that's your argument. Like, we shouldn't hold agents of the state accountable because the left might do something bad. Okay, you can make that argument, but it's a silly one. I'm melting right now, I guess, if you say. Like, this is that. So remember when I talked about tribalist brain rot? Right? This is an example of it right here. My arguments have been cogent. They've been sound. They've been easy to understand. The idea, right, that like agents of the state shouldn't have to identify themselves when they're arresting you, that's insane. FBI agents, they go around without uniform, name tags, or badges. FBI agents are required to identify themselves when they're arresting you. Do you think they're not? Debate board says it's not my. They're literally being doxxed. Oh, in what way? They might be, personally, but like when you put on the badge and when you put on a uniform and you get power and responsibility from the state, you are expected to face a level of risk that the average civilian doesn't face, right? In the performance of your duties. That's why, again, we require our military members to wear a uniform. Why? It would be much easier and much safer for them in certain ways if they weren't required to do that, right? If they could just wear plain clothes like Hamas and things like that. But we require them to wear a uniform because it's important for not only accountability, well, there's other reasons too, but also for accountability, so we can hold them to account, right? Because they need to be able to be identified, right? And we have name tapes and things like that. So, and again, if you're captured, name, rank, and serial number, right? Someone asks who you are, you gotta tell them. At least when I was serving. And we have had a huge increase in people impersonating ICE, right? Because they know they don't have to identify themselves. So a lot of people are just going and sexually assaulting women dressed up as ICE agents, right? With the mask and the little vest and things, right? This idea that because someone might do a bad thing to an ICE agent, that we cannot hold them accountable at all is specious. It's something I laugh at. And to be clear, reality is backing me up here. For the first time, I think since its inception, more people want to abolish ICE than want to keep it. I think I saw a poll from YouGov: 46% of the public wants to abolish ICE. Only 43% think ICE is acting fine or ICE should be kept. ICE should be retained, I guess is a better word. And it's because they've been empowered by people like Stephen Miller to go beyond the bounds of what they should do. And there's no accountability for these people, right? Did you guys know they're not even investigating? They're not even investigating the shooting of Good. They're not investigating the agent at all. What they are investigating is Renee Good's wife, but they're not investigating the shooter at all. And we've had several prosecutors resign, right? Because of the way the Trump administration is trying to handle this, right? This idea that we can't know the identity of the people who are trying to enforce our laws, who are trying to, who are authorized use of force to arrest you, to shoot you, right? In certain cases, to use violence against you, doesn't pass the smell test. And like people act like the news media reporting on the identity of someone who just shot a woman is doxing them is farcical. It's farcical, right? This idea that we shouldn't, like, the media shouldn't have released the name and identity of the person who shot Renee Good. What are you talking about? It's always going to happen. When you have a high profile case like this, they're always going to release the identities of those involved. It's in the public interest. ICE is a threat to the American people, frankly, in my view. You should treat an ICE agent like you would a convicted pedophile. They should be a social pariah. Okay? A social pariah. An outcast. See, Nair says, so murder them? Okay. This is the point. Like, as soon as I say something where someone is a bad guy, your immediate instinct is murder and violence against them. And I think it's telling that your immediate instinct is like, oh, I'm going to kill this person, right? I think we saw it played out as well. Like, but obviously that's not how we want to do this, right? Yeah, it's just telling that your immediate instinct is to murder anyone that you perceive as a threat. Immediately. It's telling. It shows your violent natures. Oh, someone mildly inconvenienced me. Bam, 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 bam. Reload. Bam, 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 bam. Crazy shit. But that's okay. We're gonna take power back in 2026. Okay, we're gonna get the House at least. We might flip the Senate. It's gonna be a harder row on the Senate because of just which states are up, right? Which seats are up. But it's within the realm of possibility, especially with Alaska in play now, right? We can flip the Senate, and once we have control of those, we'll get control of the White House in 2028. And oh my goodness, gang, then we'll know who is an ICE agent. Like, their anonymity won't be anonymous anymore. We'll know who they are, right? And we'll be able to hold them accountable for the crimes that they're committing. There's no statute of limitations on murder, frankly. There's no statute, or there are statute of limitations on brutality and things like that, but I don't think we'll be past those when the time comes of us to win in 2028. So just FYI what's coming, right? Your temporary anonymity won't save you, okay? So that's all I'm saying. Easy peasy. Lemon squeezy. I think we're done for today. I've yelled at you enough, and I will see you tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern. Say it with me, gang. 2 p.m. Eastern. We're going to be talking to Sitch and Adam, okay? Talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.